Now, I'm going to start this review off with something a little bit different. I'm going to talk about something that is probably not going to seem immediately related to the game until you really look at it, or unless you actually know the game and have an idea what I'm talking about. So forgive me as I go on this divergence. One of the ideas, one of the concepts in fiction primarily, but also in reality, that has always had a degree of fascination to me and has always been interesting to me, and I've always felt a certain affinity for, or an empathy for, or sympathy for, whatever you want to call that, is the idea of being without, of lacking, of having something missing of your essence, of your being, that simply makes you unusual and different. Now, in fiction, this usually is presented in a manner that has a benefit, that helps offset the fact that you are not a complete being. The term I use for this nowadays is a nobody, and that comes from the Kingdom Hearts series because it defines what I have thought of this as this so well. Now let's make something clear. This is a concept I've had in mind for many, many years, well before Kingdom Hearts ever existed. This is something going back to when I was in grade school. So the term nobody may be recent, but the concept is not, and it's not always something that linear. To use another excellent example, in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, Davy Jones is a nobody essentially. He is a being that is without, and again, he has powers, he has abilities that offset that. He becomes one with the sea. He has the ability to mentally be connected with his crew. He can he can survive underwater basically indefinitely. He can do all sorts of things, because he is without, he is lacking something. And this concept in general is something that tends to really interest me and really be something that I don't really have a good word for this. I'm going to stick with affinity. I have a certain affinity for reasons that anybody who knows me will understand. So let me say that one of the reasons that KOTOR 2 really hooked me more than KOTOR 1 is because the primary plot theme has to do with being what is, in effect, a nobody, a Star Wars nobody. Someone who has had their connection to the Force severed. Someone who is literally a vacuous hole, a void in the Force, and that is the driving point of the entire plot, especially the fact that you're not the only one. You and one of the main villains are both this type of creature that cannot even be defined as a living being by the terms of the universe, just like a nobody. And so that really interested me the very moment I picked the game up. Well, I shouldn't say that because obviously you don't know that for quite a while. But as that feeling, as that concept became more and more developed, and as it finally got revealed, I just felt this kinship almost with the exile, and consequently my exile was male, as I think I've mentioned, and so KOTOR 2 was a game I replayed more than I did KOTOR 1, even though if put to a wall, I would probably go ahead and say KOTOR 1 is probably better. KOTOR 2 I tend to like more because of that concept and because of I don't even know how to put this, the way it makes me not feel, if that makes any sense at all, and it probably doesn't, so let's just move on. KOTOR 2 was done by Obsidian Entertainment, and let us get something right out of the way right here. KOTOR 2's ending was terrible. KOTOR 2's full epilogue was non existent. And KOTOR 2 also had an entire planet worth of content cut. Is this Obsidian's fault? No. This is an unfortunate thing that happens in gaming, and it is. I cannot believe with the several resurgences in popularity of Star Wars we've had, two at least, since KOTOR 2 has come out, that we have not had a chance, that they have not had a chance to go back and fix these problems and do a re-release of KOTOR 2, especially since re-releases and ports, even not even proper remakes, but just ports have been so popular lately. I can't believe this hasn't happened. So that is something that is technically a mark against the game, even though I will never hold it against the developers. It is also worth noting that there is that fan patch, whose name I actually don't remember off the top of my head. Just look up, you know, uh, restoring KOTOR 2 basically, and you'll know what I'm talking about. Where people have gone through the effort to data mine, the lost planet and all the data and everything that was missing, and actually try and re-add it to the game like it should have been to begin with. And that does help. That does help a lot. But KOTOR 2 is ultimately a very different game from KOTOR 1. Different in scope, different in concept, different in execution. The characters are different, the player character is different. And again, as I mentioned in my KOTOR 1 review, in KOTOR 1 you were Revan. And that was basically all the reason you really needed for being the PC and for keeping the party together. You were Revan. And where you walked, people followed. In this game, they have a wonderful an almost Bioshock thing going on, a degree of character. I'm sorry, of gameplay and story integration, which is very amusing when you really sit back and think about it. The reason your party members stay with you and the reason your party members' alignments change with you is because in lore, well, in story and gameplay, it's the obvious reason because they're your party and they're not going to break up the party and they have to stay with you and they have to follow your orders. In lore, though, there is an actual reason for that, and that's because you are this vacuous hole, you are this void in the Force, and so they are reflected off of you more or less literally. And as you feed off of them, you draw people towards you, and you keep them there, and they don't really even realize it's happening, and it's wonderfully subtle in its own way. I shouldn't even say subtle. It's wonderfully smooth. It makes perfect sense when it's really laid out. It's like, you know what? Yeah, I could completely see that, and so I really liked that. And there's that crucial difference. Another really big difference is the fact that KOTOR 1 ultimately was an epic story about saving the galaxy. It really was. It's stopping a galaxy-wide threat. Now, you could argue that Nihilus was in fact a galaxy-wide threat, very very successfully, I might add. But Nihilus was a very different type of threat than Malik, and indeed a different type of threat than the Starforge. The Starforge was a dark side artifact which had tremendous potential to corrupt a lot. You know, an entire it corrupted the entire Infinite Empire. You know, already did that, so it could have corrupted the entire galaxy, basically, given the widespread nature of what the Sith Empire was doing at the time. And of course, it gave them the ability to create ships and weapons and troops en masse, and so that was an epic scale type of threat. In KOTOR 2 over here, what we have is essentially a more personal threat, because even though Nihilus is a great problem for the galaxy as a whole, he is after you specifically. He is drawn to you. Scion is after you because he is injured personally, mentally, emotionally by the fact that Kreia has so much an interest in you. Kreia herself is a personal villain to you. She is someone who has been trying to turn you into a reflection of what she is, and to create this death in the Force, to kill the Force. That was her big plan, her scheme, her desire, and not because she was evil. But actually, I'm going to go into that now really quick because we're talking about the villains anyways. But I'll discuss that in a moment. But my point is, all of the villains, all the main threats you face are very personal when you really get down to it. It's much more of a personal level, a personal scope that you're interacting with. And so many of the planets you're going through, you're not so much going through there to try and settle their problems and settle their differences so much as you are going there to try and learn and to grow and to understand more about what's going on yourself. And so that feeling was just different throughout all of it. Excuse me. Now, as I said, I was going to discuss the villains really quick. Kreia was a very interesting villain for Star Wars because, to my understanding, someone like that hasn't existed prior, and I'm not even sure someone like that has existed since. Someone who genuinely, honestly is a nihilist, ironically. And for those of you who don't know what that means, this is someone who thinks that it is a better thing for everything to go away, or in this case the Force, to go away, and is not doing it because she is evil. Kreia was certainly twisted and screwed up and wrong, but calling her evil is a bit more tricky. Because she genuinely believed, in my opinion at least, that the death of the Force, the removal of the Force, would be a good thing, would actually make things better, would actually improve things, and she expresses this so wonderfully. Whoever the voice actress they picked for Kreia was amazing, because she gets it across in her tones so well how much, how beautiful she thinks the exile is, not because they're physically attractive or not because their personality, because they are the death of the Force personified, because that is a living dead thing, if you understand what I'm saying. And she gets this across in her voice, and it's really well done. Scion, of course, is an excellent, also a personal villain, but the funny thing is all three are personal villains in different ways. Kreia is the one who is secretly trying to use you for her own ends, but is not doing so out of malice. She is doing so because, she has her own ends that she thinks are correct. Scion, Darth Scion, it was someone who wanted you to hurt like he did, and someone who wanted to break you, someone who wanted to defeat you, someone who was, I won't call him a blunt instrument because he wasn't like Malik was, and he wasn't like Maul was. Scion was more someone who already was broken and was essentially flailing about in pain for all, not literally, he wasn't going, wah, although it wouldn't surprise me given his issues, but he was mentally and emotionally flailing about in pain. Not no real goal, no long-term drive. And just want to take a moment to say that the fact that you could talk Scion down and convince him that he can finally allow himself to die, his relief and his expression of just, oh, at last I can let go, was so powerful that that line really got across just how messed up Scion had been and how torturous his existence had been, and again made the character fairly empathetic, as indeed Kreia I found somewhat empathetic as well, or I suppose sympathetic is the word I'm looking for. Then you have Nihilus. Nihilus was exactly what we needed, because with these two very personal villains with a great deal of personality, different personality, different sides of the coin here, we needed another personal villain to keep with the overall theme of the game who was essentially personality-less. You never hear Nihilus speak. You never see Nihilus's face. You never understand what he's actually after. Nihilus is a faceless, empty villain. Like the Darkspawn over in Dragon Age. The whole purpose of having a villain or an obstacle or an antagonist like that is to put them as a backdrop here, where to increase the contrast for all the actual characters who have personality, who have emotions, who have depth to them. In contrast, Nihilus was this black wall in the background, and it worked beautifully. It really got across the essence that Nihilus was this amazingly powerful, ridiculously strong black hole in the Force, and that level of personal individual threat. And he was after you. He wanted you specifically, the player character, the exile, and it was a very necessary component. And between the three of those, we had the triumvirate. What we had was a very excellent recipe for the villainry of the game, and I liked that rather than having what essentially is the one, or technically the two, villains of KOTOR 1. Instead, we have these three who all are personally connected to the player character in essentially a completely different way. Next thing I want to talk about is the fact that in KOTOR 2, you got to see the sides of the galaxy that you really didn't get to see in KOTOR 1. KOTOR 1 was it's funny because comparing these two is I'm going to be saying a lot of similar things when I get around to my Mass Effect 1 and my Mass Effect 2 reviews, because the very concepts of what happened here are very similar in concept and scope and execution and style. Because Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2, Mass Effect 1, epic, big story. Mass Effect 2, personal, individual story. Big, epic threat, individual, personal, the suicide mission, stopping Sovereign. You get me here. And this is very similar to KOTOR 2. And again, KOTOR 2, you went to I'm going to go ahead and call it the seedier side of the galaxy more. You got to see more of the underworld, more of the grit. You got to see more of what actually makes the galaxy run. And as a result of that, or perhaps directly in relation to that, one of the things they did beautifully was they really expanded not just on KOTOR 1, because they explained a lot of KOTOR 1 in KOTOR 2, especially about Revan. But on top of that, what they did was they really expanded on the setting as a whole, and they really fleshed out Star Wars with KOTOR 2. KOTOR 1 certainly set the stage, certainly set the foundation, and was an amazing game. Truly, literally, truly a work of art. KOTOR 2 built upon that foundation and really added to what was already a lush, amazing, wonderful setting, and really started fleshing it out. Nowhere is this more emphasized, in my opinion, than GoTo. Or Goto. I actually can't remember how to pronounce that. God, it's been a while. Goto, for those who don't know, is a droid that was made by the Republic to help oversee planetary construction on the planet, reconstruction, I'm sorry, on the planet of Telos. I think it was Telos, something like that. And he was given a set of directives of how he could do it, but he had to do so within the limits of Republic law and Republic resources and Republic limitations. And these two programs, these two parts of his programming, were completely incompatible. And what happened is GoTo essentially broke, and what we had was GoTo decided to override the second directive of following the laws and the rules of the Republic, and he decided instead to simply try and rebuild the Republic, and as a result he built up the single greatest smuggling organization in the galaxy by himself. And that is a level of awesome that really amuses me. I like Goto, by the way, because he is the correct type of pragmatic. Goto is what pragmatic actually should be portrayed as, in my opinion. Goto was not evil, was not lazy, was not apathetic. He was not willing to, any ends justify the means. He was simply willing to do what he felt was necessary and no more in order to repair the galaxy, in order to make the galaxy better. And I liked that, and I liked how he pulled that off, and I liked how he portrayed that, and the whole interactions with him were fascinating, especially since if you're you only realize he's Goto if you're paying attention that first time through, which I admit I was not. On second playthrough, it was much more obvious that he was Goto. He was the actual guy right from the start, and I was just an idiot for not picking up on it. So shrug. But it was so well done, and I love that character. Let's just look at some of the other characters really quick here, because I got the list up this time. I'm ready this time. Now, Aten Rand, now this is interesting, because a lot of people look at Aten Rand and they think he's a poor substitute for Carthonasi. Now, to an extent, they are correct, because Aten Rand was designed to be an analogous for what Carthonasi was to Revan at the start. Here's why they did this correctly, in my opinion. Aten Rand grew into his own character. He stopped being the Carthonasi very quickly. Carthonasi was an optimistic, good, honest, loyal career soldier who really believed in the ideals of the Republic and was not foolish. He was not blinded by it, as I just said in my KOTOR 1 review. Aten Rand was a screwed up individual who was basically mentally messed up by the war, the Mandalorian War, and ended up joining under the command of Revan and the Darth I'm sorry, of Darth Revan and Darth Malak, became a Jedi hunter and just really had some very severe issues. And one of the most powerful one of those, I love the way he explains this, is when he's talking about a Jedi who was trying to forgive him basically for all the horrible things he was doing to them, and he was so mad at them for getting in his head and for thinking what he was thinking, and he actually killed the individual, I believe, um, as a result of this. And that's what finally shocked Aten into in leaving basically the Sith forces, because that shook him, that scared him. And so what we have there is an individual who is not a good guy, genuinely not a good guy, but not actually evil. Someone who is very misguided, someone who is very mentally screwed up, someone who is probably technically insane, and needs someone who is caring and who is kind and who is compassionate in order to help them recover and become a person again, which is another reason I really like playing light side in these games. Yes, of course, I have played. I've never actually played dark side in KOTOR 2. After, as I think I mentioned in KOTOR 1, I swore off of it entirely after the whole issue with Zalbar and Mission. So never did that again. So I do not know what the dark side is of KOTOR 2 except by watching other people's play and by watching YouTube. So shrug. But I just want to say that I really do like the fact that Aten Rand, from my understanding, does react to your character very well whether you are light or dark, because, again, he basically doesn't have a choice in character. He is so screwed up, and you are a hole in the Force, which changes people into reflections of yourself. So he essentially has no choice in the matter. And you gotta be kidding me. Did that just fail? My goodness, it did. Gosh darn it. And so I'm sorry, to continue my thoughts, what I'm saying right now actually applies to all the characters to some extent or another, them reflecting off of you. The only exception is Kreia. And so I'm just mentioning it now to get it out of the way. All the characters do fit with you, whether you are evil and or good, because both will engender the light or the dark side within them due to that reflection, due to the fact that you are void in the Force. And so, again, I like Aten Rand because he is exactly what they should have done. He is someone who you initially think, oh, he's just a replacement, and then you realize he's so much more and a very different character, and I like that. Bao Dur was a character I liked because Bao Dur was very much a neutral character. He was very much someone who was there's a term for this, and I can't think of it, but he's essentially a scientist who is in it for the science. Actually, he's an engineer, but the same concept applies. He is someone who basically didn't really think twice about what he did. He was making the technology and he was doing the technology, he was making the technology, and he was right on that line. And here's the key part: when he realizes what happened with the mass shadow generator and what that did and how much that affected people and how many lives that were ended because of him and because of the device he built, it was such a shock to his system. Just out of nowhere, it's all of a sudden, oh my god, the things I do, have consequences, and that may sound obvious to you or me, but I know people who are new, people who are like that, who don't really think about things, who don't really put the pieces together until it's shoved in front of their faces just like that, and it's a shock, and it utterly changed him, and so he went, he just was like, okay, he just shoved up this mask, and when you first encounter him, and the first few times you encounter him, there's just this face that you're not actually seeing there. It's just this mask in front of him, and you finally work it way down until you see this broken individual. So many of the individuals in this game are broken and wounded and injured, and that is, as I said originally, the major theme of KOTOR 2 as a whole: wounded, broken people who are still who's still trying to go on, or conversely, who are trying to make everyone else wounded like themselves. And the player character and NPC, or I'm sorry, the party members will follow you based on what you choose. Now, of course, I chose to try and heal these wounds and make things better, but let's just move on. Excuse me, Mike, the disciple, that was his name. I couldn't think of his name back in the KOTOR 1 review. I have done a female exile, so I could see the disciple, and I unfortunately just don't have much to talk about him, but he is a very, he felt like a decent Jedi character, if you know what I mean. He wasn't completely spouting off the jargon and the rhetoric of the Council and the Jedi. He was a light Jedi who actually wanted to be good, and I liked that. I just didn't like him as much as the Handmaiden, who I'll get to in a minute. And by a minute, I mean like right now. Who was Brianna, consequently. And what the heck? Brianna, or the Handmaiden, spoiler alert, she is an. I liked the Handmaiden. I can't even explain properly why. I think it's probably the fact that the Handmaiden was someone who was basically did not have much going for herself, was very loyal, was very dedicated, was very programmed, if I can use that term, by someone who had already fallen to the dark side in that very quiet, very slow, gradual shift kind of a way, and she didn't know that. And so the Handmaiden pulled that off beautifully. Whoever the actor and the writers were for that pulled it off. The concept of this unwilling pawn of evil, which itself is unwillingly evil, very well. And I very much enjoyed helping the Handmaiden to recover herself and showing her, rather than trying to convince her, because you never do. You never convince her to turn on her master. You never convince her to turn on the dark side. Or, I'm sorry, the light side. You just sort of show your example and do, good. You do good. You help the galaxy, and she sees the results of your actions. She sees how it is, and she likes it, and she's like, okay, I think I'm going to go that way now. She slowly changes her mind to that sort of thing, and I really like that. Damn it. I really like how that developed. And so, really liked the Handmaiden. She was one of my main party members, although there's one other who is more main. I'll get to her last, actually. Mira Mira was another one of those interesting characters that she's she is a bounty hunter slash smuggler, but she is the Han Solo equivalent actually of KOTOR 2. KOTOR 2 actually does have the Han Solo equivalent in a woman, ironically, but I liked that because, as usual, the gender didn't actually matter. She was someone who was at her core a good person, but she was trying to make do in a galaxy that at its core was not. And she did her best in order to be a good person, in order to help people, in order to try and be good. And when the opportunity comes by, with the exile coming by, guess what happened? And she sees this person who has the power to do good like she wants to. Of course she joined up with him, or her in the case of the actual canon. Of course she did, instantly, without question, without hesitation. And I'd like to point out that I really like the fact that there was no romance option with Mira. I think that actually added to her character, in my completely honest opinion. I think that was necessary. Um, Next character is Hanhar. Excuse me. Hanhar is someone I've never actually seen in my party. And in case you're wondering why, it's because Hanhar only joins dark-sided characters. But I will say that Hanhar, from what I saw on YouTube and from what I saw of other people playing, is a dark side bounty hunter, an evil bounty hunter done properly, because they are not stupid evil, and he was not excessively cruel, at least from what I saw. He was instead path of least resistance evil, which, some of you will probably understand what I'm talking about. That the concept of evil that, well, I could go through all this effort and do things properly, or I could take the shortcut over here, and a lot of people will be hurt in the process, but this will be a lot quicker and easier. And that is very much what Hanhar was, and I liked that, actually, from what I saw. I liked the fact that he was not just some stupid thug, that he was instead someone who was just very straight line, and I think that type of evil needs to be done more, personally. Oh, excuse me. Now, the last character, I've already covered Gotu. The last character I'm going to cover is Vesa Smarr, who is by far my favorite character in KOTOR 2, not counting Nihilus himself. Vesa Smarr is, again, continuing this theme of wounded. She is a... She herself is so... Okay, what happened was Nihilus ended up wiping out her planet, consuming the life energy of all the people there, and she was a young child when this happened, and Nihilus ended up taking her and raising her to be his hand, servant, whatever you want to call it. And so what you have is someone who was broken from a very young age, someone who had no idea the depths of the galaxy, or what actually things were like, or what actual emotions could be like, or what personal connections were like, or what a society was like. This is someone who is so utterly disconnected from real life, within the setting, that when she finally encounters it with you, when she first goes after you at Nihilus's command, she clinches to it. She grips it with an almost desperation. The way she says the words too. I can't do the voice, obviously. My life for yours. I will do I will do whatever is necessary to keep hold of this spark of life that she has never actually seen, and no pun intended, in the entirety of her existence. And I really enjoyed being a light side character with her, because I got to show her that the galaxy did have purpose, did have life, that there was good, and if you'll forgive me for the quote, that there was good and it was worth fighting for. And I really enjoyed the fact that her character grew from someone who was this wounded, broken shell of a child into an actual woman who was defiant and willing to stand against her master. And a lot of people underestimate what exactly that would be like, to stand up against someone who has been her master since she was a child, and someone who has been, and I say master specifically, that word is overused a bit. This is someone she was a slave to this thing, and she was practically a literal mental link slave to this thing, and to be able to stand up to that and have the courage to do so really spoke volumes for that, and I really, really liked how that turned out. I'll also make an aside right now and say that the writing for those scenes was fantastic, because that also works on the dark side as well, for basically exact opposite reasons. Because she is now enslaved, she is, rather than growing and acclimating to life and understanding more about the galaxy and trying to become her own person, as a dark side, what she does is she supplements the relationship, if you can call it that she had with Nihilus, with the relationship with you, the new source of vacuous evil. Not It's separate, the new source of the void and the new source of evil. And so she becomes your slave instead, and of course, then, as a result of that, severs her links to Nihilus and goes after him with you. And it makes sense both ways. Very, very well written, very well storytelling. Oh, excuse me. Now, oh my goodness. Now, I could talk so much about the characters, because that's one of the things that really I enjoy about KOTOR 2. A lot, if that isn't obvious, because I just went over every single one of the major ones. But there really is an emphasis in this wounding. There really is this sense that the galaxy is wrong throughout all of KOTOR 2, and you really get that feeling that there is something, it's almost indescribable, that there is something poisoned within everything, that everything is wrong, that everything is off, that there is just something wrong. And Gotu said it best himself. I don't remember the exact quote, but he's, Gotu, who is looking at the wide view, who is looking at things from a galactic perspective, says the entire galaxy has been off kilter ever since the incident, at Malik Prime or whatever, Malachor 4, I think. Shoot, I can't think of the name of the word. Whatever, the planet. Ever since that incident, the galaxy has simply seemed off and simply seemed wrong, and it seems to be getting worse. And this needs to be fixed. And the general concept is the idea that that Nihilus and its actions, I really should say at that point, and the exile and their actions, and Kreia and her manipulations are what causes this to be. And so throughout the course of the game, you can choose to, of course, technically make those things better by becoming more in control of yourself and thus being able to direct your dark sideness, on the evil side, or you can try and heal these wounds in the Force and basically contain yourself and keep yourself controlled so you no longer set off the kilter of the entire galaxy. And of course you wipe out Nihilus and Scion and Kreia in the process. It was really, speaking honestly for a moment, it really spoke to me because of the sheer weight of how well they get across the feeling without actually saying it. They imply, they implicate, they, hint at the idea that what kind of life it is like to be so wounded and so lacking and so absent and so wrong, and how much it takes in order to live with that. And I do like the light side and dark side versions of that, but mostly the light, which I already talked about why I like the dark side, but the light side I want to add. One of the things I really liked was that it was really about the triumph of perseverance and hope. Hope fulfilled, as unto a tree of life. It was very, very, very satisfying, very refreshing to have that hope fulfilled, to show that we could, the character could keep going, the character could actually make things work and make things happen and fix the galaxy that they had unintentionally helped to break. And I just like to take an aside. I loved the scene where the Jedi Council died, no matter what you do. No, seriously. They kind of had it coming. Let's just be completely honest with ourselves. They really did. And as I've said before, the Jedi Council has always bothered me. And let's actually get this really clear here. I thought that scene was actually incredibly well done. Not only because it showed the Jedi Council basically how they are, if I may say that, because the Jedi Council has never been the good guys. Let's be completely frank. They have been, in most cases, the furthest ideal of the light side, which, as we've talked about, is more about pacifism and non-interaction and neutrality than anything. So, when you finally get to the point where you've called them all together and you've gotten these people all together and you've learned so much about yourself and you've grown and you've helped Atten and you've helped... this is light side view perspective, by the way. You've helped Atten and you've helped... Vesa Smarr, and you've helped the Handmaiden. All these lives have been improved by your existence, and you have tried to help salve the wounds of the galaxy as you go. And you go to the Jedi Council, and the very first thing they do is lay out for you the fact that they think you are still causing problems because you're not in enough control of yourself. And the only reason these people are following you is because of that void, which may or may not be true at that point. It certainly was true to begin with. At that point, it's debatable. But either way, they really continue to just show their narrow-minded thinking, because their thought process is the only thing, and I want to stress this, the only thing they can do to make this situation better, to fix the problem that is you, is by locking you out from the Force and sealing you away again, to do the same thing they just did, but to do it properly this time, and effectively, for all intents and purposes, kill you. Your body will keep going, but you get my point here. And that is so Jedi Council, that is so Jedi Code, it was perfect. And it exactly showed what monsters that kind of system can produce under the right circumstances. But not necessarily making them monsters themselves, because they did have good intentions in mind. I liked that a lot. And it was thus infinitely more satisfying when Kreia came along, who also, again, wants to make the galaxy a better place, is trying to help things, is trying to improve things in her own way, which is also wrong, by wiping out the Force. And these two forces, Kreia and the Jedi Council, are completely opposed for the exact same reason. And I really liked that contrast. I really liked the dichotomy there of the two sides, and how both of them are very clearly, from an outside perspective, from the perspective of us, the players, are very clearly both wrong. And it's demonstrated throughout the game that they are both wrong, and that's why they both go away by the end of the game. No matter what you do, No matter what choice you are, no matter whether you're evil or good, both of these problems that would destabilize the entire galaxy if left to themselves are removed, which was very important and a very critical decision for them to make because they could not leave forces like that, or Nihilus for that matter, alive in the galaxy so far in the past because they would simply destabilize to such a degree that it would have ripple effects that would still be felt in more modern canon. So they had to remove them, no matter what you did. But I think, again, that they did that very well, that they did that perfectly, again, and it made sense with both sides. Now, oh goodness. Next thing, I'm going to kind of wrap this up a bit quickly here because I'm running out of time, unfortunately. But there are a few other things I wanted to touch on. First of all, the music for KOTOR 2 was, again, excellent. I really liked it. It really added to the atmosphere. It had a lot of almost creepiness to it, which was really well done. It really gave that sense of unease that the whole game pulled off really well. And when I say unease, I'm not talking about, just earlier today I was talking about Tomb Raider and how uneasy that game made me feel. That's different. When I'm talking unease, I'm talking about, gosh, I don't even have a better word for it. It's sort of tension, a sort of atmosphere of just like if you can just picture the silence and there's just this tiny little violin so quiet in the background you can barely hear it and it's just playing this one note and it's never stopping and you can barely even hear it. So you might not even be aware you're hearing it. That's how quiet it is. But as it goes on and as it gets further, you just kind of tense up, and it gets worse and worse. And it was this beautiful atmosphere the game pulled off. I'm not talking about literal violin, by the way. I'm just trying to get across the feeling, and I don't have a word for this. But it was excellent. It was excellent atmosphere in that game. It really was. And the story, the writing, the dialogue, the voice acting, the music, everything really came together. And let's be honest, KOTOR 2 had a fantastic finale. That's a really good point in its favor. While the ending was tripe and the epilogue was non-existent, not their fault again, the finale was amazing because the finale starts all the way back when the Nihilus assaults the space station over Telos, and so you get this massive battle of awesome, of wide-scale battle, and you get to board his ship, and you get to battle your way through this awesome ship and encounter all these different characters, and you get to see the dead people, and you take out Nihilus, and then you go straight to Malachor 5. That was it, Malachor 5. I like how it just rolled off my tongue when I was actually talking about it, and then you go there, and then you get to Malachor 5, and while there are a couple of combat sequences there, the whole mood just takes a sudden plummet into just absolute eeriness. There we go. That's the word I was looking for. Eerie. It was very eerie. It was very graveyard at midnight with fog and the occasional horribleness going on. It was just, oh my god. And you make your way up and you take out Scion in the best way possible, and then you fight Kreia, who fights with multiple lightsabers, which is the first time we've seen that. They have actually mentioned people who fought with multiple lightsabers in the past, and which is awesome, and is something I really wish they would have done before or since, because to my knowledge they haven't. That is still the only time we've seen someone who has had multiple lightsabers that they're attacking with, rather than just the two. And then it just kind of fell off. Anyways, all of this reasons combined makes Captain Planet. No, all these reasons all combine to make what I think is truly an excellent game. It is such a shame that the game got chopped off so badly towards the end there. And I do mean basically at the end. You think the Mass Effect 3 problem was worse. This was terrible. I do think Mass Effect 3's problem was worse for different reasons. But it was such a letdown to get through what is an amazing game and to just have it stop. Much worse than Mass Effect 3's. You beat Kreia, and then she talks for like a minute, and that's it. That's the end. You watch you fly away from the asteroid. Credits roll. That was it. It was such a shame, and I do hope to God, I genuinely do hope that someday we get to see a properly made remake of KOTOR 2 and KOTOR 1 for that matter, but especially KOTOR 2 because KOTOR 1 was a complete product. KOTOR 2 needs to be finished, and I guess that's all I have to add here. So I'm going to go ahead and package this up and post it. And hopefully you guys will like it. See you around.